If marriages were 5 to 10-year contracts with options to renew if both parties accept, how would the world be different? Happily married people would have to wait in a long annoying ass line every 10 years and it will put everyone in a bad mood. Marriage re-up officers will be rude and condescending because of all the dumbass general public they have to deal with every day. There was a book where they essentially figured out immortality and then had to deal with a whole bunch of things. One of them was marriages. I think they actually ended up all having year limits on them. It was a good book by Drew McGarry-Cale's Postmortal. Side note though, my favorite book by him is The Hike. It's real weird but I loved it. This would change very little. Not renewing a marriage after 10 years when you have a bunch of joint property and kids is not any different from a no-fault divorce. Would be equally messy. And if you don't have any joint property or kids, a regular divorce would be pretty painless anyway. Essentially with no-fault divorce laws, any marriage can already be treated as renewable contract. More people wouldn't join their lives the way they do in a regular marriage. Everything would be about mine and theirs. I mean, honestly, in our marriage dividing up our lives sounds terrible. Who gets the awesome couch we picked out together? The cats who we raised? The beautiful plate we picked out together in Europe? Nobody knows, and hopefully nobody will ever know. Less stability. More cheating if people are already with one foot out the door. More child psychological issues. And a whole lot of asset problems. Marriage is like agriculture but for mating. It saves the time that would have been spent on looking for a mate and lets us focus on other things. 5 to 10 years is too short of a span. It would probably mean less couples having kids and in general an increase in anxiety levels. I think it would cause many people to try harder when it came to maintaining the relationship. When someone has promised to stay with you no matter what, through sickness and in health, until you die, it's really easy to get complacent. Just look at the sheer number of men and women who completely let themselves go after a couple of years into marriage. Many of them do it because they feel like they don't have to try anymore. This inevitably often leads to a lot of resentment, lack of sexual attraction, bitterness, fantasizing about other people, cheating, and, surprise, divorce. And if you can just get legally divorced when you are sick of each other, what was the point of being married or making those vows anyways? So yeah. I personally think that marriage contracts are a great idea. You could potentially even do a sliding scale. Do a 2-year contract initially, then a 5-year, then a 7-year, then a 10-year, etc. It might actually make people happier. If you both wanted to stay married, then the faith and trust you have is reaffirmed. Some people might split who otherwise would not without the push this gives. So instead of staying together in misery, they'd just move on. What's the point of getting married then? The whole point is that you're saying this is your lifelong partner. And though some don't work out, I feel like this would miss the point of marriage completely. Plus it would make things more difficult. I can imagine having to deal with more paperwork and documents. It could become a business. These contracts have to come from somewhere, right? I'd rather spend time looking for a woman who I like the personality of, and who loves my personality back. The external things degrade over time, and therefore mean nothing in the long run. I'd rather not have to pay for a contract every 5 to 10 years. Also, domestic violence would be easier as both parties are under a contract. There's actually a book called The Postmortal, which is a dystopian future novel that goes over this exact thing. It has a dark comedic outlook that shows how negative this would probably be. A huge decline in marriage and women being the largest victims of it, but not the only ones. The marriage rate would also in all likelihood plummet if I remember correctly, and not to impose my views, but I respectfully believe the moral situation of society would greatly decline. Children being stuck in split families, with mothers becoming essentially single mothers sometimes. Men and women splitting and not renewing contracts because their partner had simply grown annoying, unappealing to them, had a bad moment, or they simply grew bored. Love in sickness and health grooms a healthy relationship for life, the soul, and an inspiration for the children. Emo and what I've been taught. Communication between spouses would improve. As a lawyer friend of mine once said, in the context of a lease, but it still applies, contracts outline expectations. With the rise of semi-custom legal services, think LegalZoom, couples would have templates outlining the things they should discuss before marriage. Spouse getting fat, overusing substances, not going to the dentist, thinking about quitting their job, or spending too much time with their friends? Refer to the contract. Just marry someone who won't divorce you. I know that sounds dumb and simple, but seriously, some people really don't think too much when it comes to getting married. It's a huge commitment, and if you aren't ready for it, don't do it. Marriage is entirely optional, no matter what anyone says. It is. I love the way it is designed. Other than the fact that divorces usually end up favoring the woman, but that is more a divorce-related issue, not an actual issue of marriage. My biggest piece of advice is this: if you plan on marrying someone, you have to marry them as they are. Do not expect them in any way to change, and do not want to change them. You have to look at the person you are marrying and think, if they were exactly the same forever, would I be okay with that? If the answer is anything but some form of yes, you are not ready to marry that person. You have to love that person as they are. Otherwise, you are doing yourself and your partner a disservice. As for the actual topic, it'd be okay, I guess. I wouldn't partake in it and wouldn't need it. But some marriages might actually benefit. It's up to the people involved on how they want to handle it. I love this idea, and that seems to be the minority in this thread. Most people are saying either divorce rates would go way up or people would just stop getting married, because what's the point if it has a time limit? I think that's exactly the point. Marriage is scary because it's supposed to be the rest of your life, but you can't be 100% sure it'll work out. Half of marriages in the traditional format don't. I think having preset time limits would actually increase the marriage rates and decrease divorce. If either party doesn't want to re-up the contract, you both walk away amicably. I think this contract system could be really socially beneficial. It would allow people to have a trial run of married life but be able to walk away from it if it doesn't work out. I'm aware of no-fault divorces. Those rarely seem to leave both parties very happy. You can't be positive you'll be happily married to someone until you've married them, like testing if a power line is lit by grabbing it. Maybe you find out after a year that married life isn't for you. Maybe you'd prefer to just be friends. Maybe once you put a ring on them you're so turned into a completely different person you don't like. This system provides a drama-free out. Could work provided it had ironclad enforceable and court provisions about cheating, non-renewal of contract, and no alimony or asset seizure in the event of non-renewal of contract. Child support payments would have to go into a fund for the kid, to not be used or spent by anyone but the child, and only when the child turns 18. It depends on if the courts treat both parties equally. It would suck if every 5 years a guy risks half of everything he worked for based on his wife's choice. Eliminate the risks involved. Treat both parties as equals, and you would probably have stronger and more stable marriages. And the limited contracts would be an affordable way to end the union on respectable terms if it does not work out. Before Catholicism ruined Ireland, we had the Brehon laws. Women had equal rights and status with men, either side could initiate a marriage, and it was a contract for 3 years. At the end of that time you simply stood in the village square and said that you were no longer married if it wasn't working out. David Brooks has a recent article in The Atlantic. One of the things he notes is the rate at which children are forced to endure a string of parental relationships, each one wreaking havoc and trauma upon the child. The repercussions echoing long into adulthood. Not to mention the trauma parents endure as a result of being separated from their children. Further degrading marriage, further catering to selfishness would only lead to increased trauma for everyone, increased economic chaos and turmoil. Marriage is a Herculean struggle. Being a parent is a Herculean struggle. The solution is not to make it easier to bail out, but to properly orient and prepare persons for marriage, to build communities and support structures that act as release valves for the pressures of marriage and of parenthood. It is really hard. But we, as a society, seem bent on making it harder at every turn in service of catering to our whims and fantasies. We can, and must, do better for one another's sake. Girls teen to 20s would fetch higher value, and women over 30 would fetch very little value. It'd be weird. The implicit deal today/30 years ago is that guy trades big chunk of lifetime earnings/stability/status for the sex of a beautiful young woman, and the childbearing of a old young to middle-aged woman. I think slightly different couplings would become more common. Teenage to 20-something men would be very low value, because women would just aim for already established 30-something to 50-something men. It destroys the point of marriage. What is the point of from this day forward, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part? If 5 years later, the couple decides to break up because of, say, a terminal illness or because they don't love each other anymore. The point of marriage is not to stick around as long as it's still fun. The point is to make a lifelong commitment to each other's happiness as members of the same household as long as they both live. If you only want to stick around someone as long as you still enjoy their company, don't marry them. And if that's how you see marriage, don't go around trying to legally change marriage into a temporary thing. Maybe invent a new category of togetherness and call it temporary companionship. Will you be my temporary companion, in sickness and in health, or at least until one of us gets bored? I highly doubt the renewals would be uniform. So you'd also have to get a renewal lawyer each time to hammer out the fine print of the contract before agreeing to the length and terms of the renewal. Is this your first renewal with this person? Then you need a document to protect X, Y, and Z. Are you expecting this to be your last renewal? Then you need to have this type of document to ensure a will is passed on to X or Y. Is this the 5 or 10-year variety? My parents would have not renewed their marriage at the 15-year mark due to my dad's failure to correctly heal after a major surgery and his vicious lashing out due to not knowing how else to deal with his unbearable 24/7 pain. For a full year, he slept in a lazy-boy chair in the living room with a portable urinal and bedpan for half a year because he could not move. It was literally a year rough patch. Which relatively is a long time, but now at almost 31 years of marriage they are happier than they have ever been. I cannot make a relationship last longer than 1 year, so I would not support this renewal at all. Renewal would be an absolute disaster and change the world for the worse. I actually think divorce should be 100x more difficult than it currently is.